Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise this evening in adjournment proceedings to return to a question I asked October 23rd of last year. Some will remember this question only for the uproarious laughter that ensued, most inappropriately, as some members in this place thought the Minister of Transportation had misspoken. He referred, and with the kind of, I have to say, the kind of sense of shared commitment that the opposition benches all felt in opposing the omnibus budget bills put forward by the previous government. In the spring of 2012, Omnibus Budget Bill C-38 repealed our Environmental Assessment Act, destroyed the Fisheries Act. We fought very hard against that, and then the fall of the same year was another Omnibus Budget Bill, C-45, that gutted the Navigable Waters Protection Act. So in referring to that, the Honourable Minister of Transportation referred to remembering spending the whole night with me, which of course was in this House, 24 hours of straight voting. Very few members actually stayed in their seat voting continually on every amendment and every motion. And since most of the amendments were mine, I stayed here in my seat for 24 hours voting straight through. It certainly wasn't an occasion for raucous laughter, but we do know sometimes people in this place don't rise to the occasion. They sink to grade 2 or maybe kindergarten. But in any case, Mr. Speaker, I want to return to that because now we have seen the proposed amendments to the Navigable Waters Protection Act. In fact, they were tabled in this place just last week. I've reviewed them thoroughly, and where I had extreme concern that I raised in my question that the Minister of Transportation was not likely to meet the mandate letter in which the Prime Minister had instructed him to restore lost protections to the Navigable Waters Protection Act. It appeared from discussion papers, from the report of the Committee on Transportation, the Parliamentary Committee, that the government was going to be prepared to say, this is what the previous government did. They took 99% of navigable waters from our inland waterways out of the Act and created a short list of about 100 named waterways that are internal to Canada. And that would be that. If a waterway was on that list, it's a navigable river, navigable water. If it's not on the list, it's not. And it appeared for quite a while that the Liberal approach would be to say, well, we'll create a system where people can add waters to the list by application. It was a real relief in reading Bill C-69, one of the few places in reading that bill that I was actually relieved, that the definition of navigable waters has been changed such that it's not just the schedule of waterways that will be considered navigable waters, but any waterway that human beings are currently using is the easiest way to understand it. It won't be as broad as what there was in 1881, that any body of water anywhere in Canada, which you could put a canoe or a kayak and navigate your way through, would require a permit from the federal minister before that body of water could be obstructed. But it's much broader than it was under Harper. So it's not a complete restoration of lost protections, but a much bigger swath of interior waters of Canada are now under what's called the Navigable Waters Act. What's missing, of course, is that in the issuance of that federal permit, one of the aspects of the lost protection was that it would trigger an environmental review. And under Part 1 of C-69, we now have what's called impact assessment, but without any triggering to review projects where a federal minister has to give a permit. We await finding out what the designated project list will look like, but we still fall short of what was promised. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for her tireless commitment to environmental protection, and she has made a difference. And our government committed to restoring navigation protections, and that's what we have done. On Thursday, our government introduced Bill C-69, which contains amendments to the Navigation Protection Act and to create the new Canadian Navigable Waters Act. This new act is informed by a study conducted by the Standing Committee of Transport, Infrastructure and Communities, as well as 14 months of listening to Canadians, including Indigenous peoples, boaters, industry, other levels of government, environment, non-governmental organizations, and the Canadian public. The new Canadian Navigable Waters Act delivers on our government's mandate commitment to restore and better protect the rights of Canadians to travel on Canada's vast network of waters. It will do this by introducing navigation protections for every navigable water in Canada, increasing transparency in our processes, and giving Indigenous people and communities a say in projects that may affect them, and by providing opportunities for Indigenous people to become partners in protecting navigation. Indigenous peoples have a sacred relationship with waterways and use those waterways to exercise their rights. This is why the Canadian Navigable Waters Act is an important opportunity to advance our government's commitment to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples based on the recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. Indigenous people have told us they want more information about development on the navigable waters in their traditional territories. The Canadian Navigable Waters Act proposes new notification requirements and the creation of a public registry that would make information available about new projects in all navigable waters in Canada. It also proposes a new process that would allow Indigenous people and communities to raise concerns about projects with project proponents and for the government to assist with resolving these concerns when it's needed. The proposed Canadian Navigable Waters Act is aligned with the principles and approaches of the broader environmental and regulatory system introduced by my colleagues, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, on February the 8th. Any permitting decisions under the Canadian Navigable Waters Act will be fully integrated into this new impact assessment system so that we can protect our environment, fish, waterways, rebuild public trust, and create new jobs and economic activity. Together, we are committed to implementing a new environmental and regulatory system that responds to the needs of Canadians. Thank you.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if in my first introduction to adjournment proceedings I did not state clearly enough my appreciation to the Minister of Transport for listening to the concerns that the very narrow approach of allowing additional waterways to be added to a schedule was inappropriate. I'm grateful that he listened. Again, it's not the full restoration of protections, but it's much closer. And I also want to add my voice of thanks to his Honourable Parliamentary Secretary here tonight, because I know she did a lot of heavy lifting herself. I don't see in the Act the thing that she just mentioned. So if I'm not seeing it, I'd love to know where it is, which is the full integration of granting permits on navigable waters for obstruction under this new system of impact assessment. There is no law list in the new impact assessment legislation. It's only by project list designations, and those are not yet complete. And if it's on federal land. We've lost other environmental assessment triggers. It's a much weaker piece of legislation than the one Harper repealed. And I'd love to know how we, in fact, have an assessment before the minister gives permits under the Navigable Protection Act.
The honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there was, the honourable member is right. There was an awful lot of work that went into this, and these amendments that created this new Canadian Navigable Waters Act does include protections for navigation on every navigable water, including lakes and rivers. Through this legislation, we're delivering on that commitment to restore navigation protection. We're providing for greater transparency and accessibility to give local communities a say in projects that could affect navigation. We do recognize the importance of navigable waters to Indigenous peoples and providing them with opportunities to partner with Canada. That is why we developed a comprehensive and complementary protection regimes that will preserve our priceless environment for generations to come. Thank you.